Pride?
yeah, it's not something that I hide. It's just something that,
Doesn't come up a lot.
doesn't come up a lot. I do have to tell people, that I deal with, you know, whether it's been TV or radio or even just something working with Lost Coast Pride, I have to tell people, hey, I have a brain injury. I do stutter. I do go nonverbal. I do, there are things, especially if I'm in a crowd, right? I have a service dog, um, but I can't take him everywhere, which is unfortunate. But there's just some situations that he's not, it wouldn't be a good environment. Stuff like the show and stuff like that. He would want to be town
Hanging out with
right,
everybody.
hanging out with everybody, town greeter, but he always makes sure he knows where I'm at. But um so uh, dealing with that is a little bit different.
Do you mind
Um
I'm sorry, you can
yeah,
pull this out so
okay.
you can lean back if you'd
Right.
like. You're not gonna break the stand or
Right. So
anything.
it's a little difficult sometimes with dealing with some of the things that I have to do. Um
Just that public persona you have to put out there a
right,
little bit.
right. And I don't mind being social, but and I don't mind being the face of Lost Coast Pride. I would rather that I be out and visible, um, and give people a face to, because most people think of someone who's transgender as a trans woman, right? So giving it a face, giving it, hey, here's your kind of example. I'm a trans elder, so um, it's been a little bit more difficult since my brain injury to kind of have to corral my thoughts and corral what I'm doing and writing everything down. And I'm sure people I've forgotten to respond to or whatever. So I try to keep up with it. So having my wife help me, it has been
Huge.
tremendous. Yeah,
Do you mind if I
exactly.
ask what happened, what caused the brain injury?
Yeah, I it's kind of like a boxer over time. I started at the age of I was must have been 6, I think. I got kicked in the face by a horse. And from then on it was, getting knocked out or like metal toboggans in the head and um various things that happened to me during my service time in the Navy and then a few years ago I have a problem with falling down too as well because I have physical disabilities. So a few years ago, I fell. I had some medication that was new, and it was causing my body and my brain to fight each other. And so the next morning, I got taken to the ER because I was all banged up, and they took a CT scan of my head, and they're like, "Do you know you have a brain injury?" I'm like, "Well, I do now." And then it explains a lot. My brain injury has symptoms like bipolar. So I get manic and I get motor mouth and I get just so frantic running around and then I have the crash. So I'm now on new medication for that and whatever. So things are starting to level out. My brain just is not ever going to be the same. So it's like a boxer.
A lot of repetitive trauma
Repetitive
over a
trauma to my
lifetime.
head, yeah, and, over time, things have happened and I couldn't explain them, and then, with the diagnosis of a brain injury and that kinda thing, I was like, "Oh, well, now I get it," right? So
Things have happened, meaning behavior responses.
yeah, behavioral, uh, when you get older, you start forgetting things. Well, I was going beyond that. So I would literally have someone look at me right in the eye, and 5 seconds later, I'm like, "What did you just say to me?" Right? Because I didn't, and I heard them, and I understood what they said, but I didn't remember. So having some, different behaviors explained, like this is what a TBI is, this is some of the symptoms you can get. This is your other symptoms you can get, or you can get a combination of this, that, and the other, and whatever. It just depends on your brain as an individual. So I've had to kind of readjust my life for that. And so this time around with fundraising, and I did it years ago when I was doing drag in Reading, but this time around with fundraising and doing things, it's a little bit more difficult. And so far, it's really just me, my wife, and one other person who helps with the vendors. And we do have some of our logistics, but we don't always need logistics. So I've been looking for a personal assistant for a while. It doesn't seem to be coming out of the woodwork though, because it's not a paid job. My job's not a paid job for executive director of Lost Coast Pride. I do it because my community needs it.
And so how did that start? Lost Coast Pride. What
Uh,
what got you into that?
well, the first protest that happened a couple of years ago in Ferndale, um, it was really kind of this thrown together last minute. Hey, this preacher's marquee is just horrendous. Um, and so it started as a protest. And then last year, I got asked 3 weeks before 3 weeks before actual Pride to put it together. And I did. I was very successful at it just for 3 weeks left, right? So I was doing, I had all these people that wanted to march. I had people that wanted to vend at the festival at the end. So this year, it's going to be huge compared to last year. Well, last year we had close to 300 people marching, and it continues to be a protest. It's not a parade. It's not a celebration of our existence. The march itself is a protest and will remain a protest. Um, Even if things change, it will remain a protest because there are always going to be people that view us as sinners, as horrible, groomer is going around quite a bit. But they view us as unnatural, which is amazing to me. Um, so it's always going to be a protest. And at the end, when we're done, we have a festival. So we have vendors show up and we have, people come and have food out or do, there's that Ferndale at Fireman's Park, there's a picnic place, right? There's all sorts of stuff that they can do. Um, so yeah, so the festivals, the celebration of who we are is at the end of that.
And so it really started as this counter movement to
Yes.
what was coming out of the church.
Yes, yes, it did. It had the church's marquee has even since then caused problems. Um,
What did the marquee say back then
Back
that
then it
caught your eye?
said, "Been have you something," and I paraphrase this, to the effect of "Been hurt by the LGBTQ community, find healing here." So I was like, "Hurt by the LGBT what?" So I didn't understand. I didn't understand how that was a thing. So it started as that, and it really kind of upset of a lot of us because we don't go out to hurt people. Our community is not about that. It's about inclusiveness. It's about acceptance. It's about being around the same people that are like us and those and allies, but mostly just community. So I didn't understand. Most of us have been hurt by the church, right? In general, especially part of the LGBTQ community, part of the queer community. We've all been hurt by churches, and so this was something that was thrown out there out of the middle of nowhere, right? I mean,
Was there support for that from the community? Was this a community push against you guys, or
no,
it
it
was
was
just the church?
just the church, right? And at that point, when the church's sign got posted on social media, there were some people that were like, well, you can ignore that sign. Well, that's called privilege. Because if there's a queer person that comes into town from as a tourist, because we get tourists all over, all up from all over the world in Ferndale, right? So, um, when you say have a marquee like that, and mind you, it's not on the main street, but it is on one of the streets that people frequent. Um, it doesn't make anybody feel welcome, right? So the community was like, it was divided at that point. I think most people were still kind of wary about being supportive, and being out about being supportive. And so, like I said, it was privileged for someone to say, well, you can just ignore that sign. Well, no, you can't, because when you're a queer person, that sign is a beacon of you're not welcome here. You're not welcome as a human. So it wasn't the community so much itself, although they did make comments, and of course, um, it was more of that church, and I think that that was really the tipping point. And he's kind of done it himself. Pastor Brumwell has. Put all this stuff out there, whether, all since then, about LGBTQ and our drag shows and all the stuff about how it's going to harm kids and all this
It's
other
a lot
thing.
of it seems to be focused around the drag shows nowadays.
Yes, they do. Of course, there will be stuff coming up for Pride, but yes, the drag shows are a huge thing. And when I started, before I transitioned from, because I was assigned female at birth. So before I transitioned, I was doing drag in Reading, and this was in 97, um, 96, 97. And there was never an uproar about drag queens anywhere. And that's in Reading where it's conservative. There was never an uproar. We had our shows that people brought their kids to our shows, those kind of things. And now it seems to be this thing where, they're focused on that part of our community of someone doing drag, and it doesn't matter whether it's a show for kids or whether it's just a drag show. Now, we do drag shows all over Humboldt County. It happens everywhere, right? But because the first drag show that Lost Coast Pride wanted to put on was a family-friendly show, that's what really kinda, made everything hit the fan. Um, mm, it was, um it was announced before we even announced it. Um, we have some people that in Humboldt County, and really still in California, nationwide, whatever, that feel that someone getting, and it doesn't matter whether it's a straight person or a gay person, getting in a dress and entertaining, which is what it is entertainment, whether it's entertaining adults or entertaining kids, it's all entertainment.
Well, I think a lot of the hesitation comes from that aspect of it being for kids as well. I think that's where it
hmm
gets dicey for a lot of people.
It does. The thing is that, I didn't pop out at the age of 18 and say, "Oh, now I'm queer," right? So I knew when I was a kid that I was a boy, right? So how do you take away something that a child can see as representation? Um, the problem is that, people are trying to find something wrong with it, and they've sexualized it.
But don't you think there is an argument that it could be perceived as sexual by nature as well? While it may not
Depends.
be sexual for some of the performers,
Right.
for others it very well could be.
Well, it depends. An actual show for kids is an actual show for kids, which means any kind of Disney, music, any kind of, and there's even modern music now that is for kids, and that's how they rewrote it, right? So the costuming, the music, there's no swear words. It's all G. It's all rated G. The costuming is above board. It is literally not gyrating. Like, when you go to an adult show, right, you're expecting to see all of that. And so what people have done is what they've seen in an adult show or heard that happens at an adult show, and they've applied it to a children's show. Right, and that's not the case. If you do a show for kids, just like, a drag queen story time, right? they're not gyrating, they're not doing any of that, they're dressed appropriately, they're made up, and they're telling stories to children. Children are listening to these stories because you have an animated character in front of you that's making that story come to life as their character. Really, it's like, picking almost like picking a character in D&D and going with it, right? So, like, the one we have coming up in April is an all ages show, right? It's for kids, it's for families. And more often than not, the families that are coming are queer families that would like to have their children at an event because a lot of times they don't get that. And then there's other families that are showing up with their children. Parents have charge of their children, right? Parents are the ones that can say yay or nay whether or not they're bringing their child to a show. To protest the fact that somebody has a show when it's parental, it's up to the parents. It's
Yeah,
not
but we
up
have
to.
some overarching principles that remove those rights from the parents, right? You can't take your kid to a strip club.
No, you can't. No, you can't. You can't take your kid to a bar. You can't do any of that. But if you've got a kid show, like for instance, one of the performances that's happening is Hakuna Matata, with Pumbaa and Timon in costume. Um, those are what we're having. We're having somebody do a grease number. We're having somebody do there are and there'll be costumes where it's appropriate for children. Even your costume, if you're gonna take off a robe or something, the costuming underneath it has to cover you. There's no, getting up there and yeah, there's dancing, there's performing, there's lip syncing, but there's no getting up there and doing what you do in an adult drag show, right? And we're making this more of not just a show, but a festival. We'll have food trucks there, we'll have vendors there that are all kid appropriate, all family appropriate. So people have made a big deal out of having these, drag shows for kids when the y- drag shows are literally how we're doing it. There's not even tipping at this drag show, right? Performers are being paid so that they don't have to be tipped. We don't want any of that. We don't want That's a tradition that adults have to show respect for the performer, right? Is giving tips. That's not something that and a lot of kids do know that. They do know that that's a thing, but this is not something we wanna have at this show. We want the kids to be able to really enjoy the show without worrying about, "Oh, can I give a tip?" or making it look like any kind of strip club. I flat out refuse to make it look like that, and so do the rest of the people that are helping us plan this show. There may have been other shows, prior to this that, in cities or whatever that it may have come up where it wasn't appropriate. Um,
Well, Redwood Pride was the last one that was kinda called into question for being appropriate for kids, right?
right, that was the last one being called into question, and I personally know the person that got filmed for that, and, it was amazing how they went looking for any kind of motion or movement during that show to make it seem like and they didn't film the whole thing, and they only filmed parts where they thought, "Oh, you're gyrating, you're showing your crotch, you're doing whatever." They were literally set out to find all of that. I knew they were. They had people outside distracting with the protesting and a guy with cameras on each one of his phones, on each one of his shoulders, and he's going in and he's filming on this on purpose, getting up in the performer's face. um,
Are we talking about Donnie Creekmore?
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, from, Lost Coast Populous.
Populist.
Yeah, yeah. So, purposely went in there looking for stuff, um, and in there, I don't think it had occurred to any of the people who put it together that, the tipping is part of the problem because it just makes it seem more like a strip club, right? Which I will totally agree with you, but, um there was no inappropriateness. It was sought after, right? So they didn't film the whole thing, and here's what I don't understand. They're so look what's these children being, exposed to all of this. Well, they never had any of the parents' permission to film.
I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, from
Mm,
Donnie's footage, I have seen, I believe it's 2 parts,
mhm.
and I have seen the first part, and it seemed like it was continuous throughout the whole first portion of the performance, and he was just in the back standing there. It didn't look like he was engaging, it seemed like
Right.
he was being more engaged with by the performers and people trying to get him out of there.
Well, they were because he didn't have permission to film children.
But I believe it's like at a public park, right? So you can't
Well,
exclude people.
but here's the thing. It was inside the building, right? Now, mind you, it was a public thing, but people who were there were queer families that had their children with them. And I personally, it doesn't matter to me whether it's public or not, right? I personally don't have the permission to film someone else's child. That gets put on the internet, and then you're putting that child's face on the internet, right? So, like our show in April, there's no filming unless it's authorized. We have a couple of people who are filming their performances, just the stage itself. Um, but there's no filming, there's no picture taking, there's none of that. It will be posted. People will, there will be bag checks and security and everything else. And during the performances, we'll have people roaming and catching people, filming. Um, if
Well, I
that,
think that you could make the argument that's kind of what Donnie did, is it wasn't necessarily he was focused on filming the audience, it's that the performers were engaging with the audience coming off the stage, and he was just following the performers.
right, but he shouldn't have been. It was still children.
Yeah, but it's still a public place. So I
I
think
get it.
legally
Legally,
you could argue
yes.
morally, you could try to
Right,
make that argument, but I
right.
think
Well, they're trying to argue
the
morally that we're doing nothing but grooming children because of drag shows. So,
yeah, but I mean, in this particular instance, him filming
right.
isn't.
No, it is. It's a public thing. It's not a, yeah, here's the law, it's okay, you're in a public space. No, the argument I'm trying to make here is they went in purposely looking for something that inappropriate for children, when I and lots of other people believe that it's inappropriate for you to film children and then throw your stuff up on the internet,
What
right?
about the argument that he's the news?
He's they're not news. They're not news at all. They try to seem like that. They try to give, interviews and that kind of thing. Mm-mm. They're not news. They're not even considered news by the most of the journalists in town. Most of the newspapers, they're not. They're not considered news at all. They're not considered the press.
But what counts as being considered as the press? What makes somebody in that? Right, because somebody has to start out somewhere. So
Right. You
Lost
have
Coast
to.
in the beginning had to start out
Right. We had to start out
Outpost,
somebody.
Lost Coast
So
Outpost had to start out as something and then grew into this.
right. So it's all about having. Now, normally when you go to something, then it says, say something like a press conference or a news release or a press release, right? Most of those people, unless they're, like say someone like you is doing a podcast or making little clips or whatever, most of those people have like a says their press, that they are part of that they're there, they have a legitimate outlet. Right,
But could
lost.
you just print that up for, like, 50 cents?
Right, I guess you could. I would hope that you wouldn't, but yes, I guess you could. But
You'd
that's
probably
just
be able to get into some interesting places doing that. I
right,
don't know if
right,
anybody would
right.
stop you. They'd see the press pass and be like, "Okay,
Oh, okay,
this
right,
guy's
it's
good."
legit, right, and here's the thing, they don't do news. They don't give you the local shakedown on what's going on or whatever. Basically, what they do is they're just out there fear-mongering.
But doesn't that seem like an opinion more than a factual representation of what that organization might or might not stand for?
Yeah, but have you seen their casts? I mean, have you really kind of
I've
paid
had I
attention to
had
their
Donnie Creekmore on the podcast.
mm. Oh, okay.
So I've
Right,
talked to him
right.
for a
But
while.
but here's the thing, what, like, the church doesn't tell you and what, like, they won't tell you is literally go to their YouTube channels and listen to what they're saying, right? A legitimate newscast, is something that gives you the facts.
I don't know if we have any of those today.
Right, right. You would
See,
think.
that's the problem though,
Right,
is you could extend that same thing to CNN, you could say Fox News, you could
right,
say
right.
basically everything we consider news today is full of
Well, if it
shit.
hadn't, well, yeah, if it hadn't been for Reagan going, "Hey, let's sign off on this," we still would have legitimate newscasts, right? But literally, there are, newspapers that give you, um, newspapers and of course, websites and whatnot that give you the facts. This is what happened. This is how it is, and then they have an opinion section, right? Even with
I'm
news.
sorry, can you just pull that out?
Sorry.
Just you I
Yeah.
know you're
I know.
animated, you can feel free
No,
to move that around.
I was burping. I just
Oh,
didn't want to
sorry.
like burp in the microphone. Sorry. Um, so those things like the newspapers and whatever, they give you the facts, and then they have their opinion section, right? So what Lost Coast Populous does is not that. Right. They've gone through a lot of trouble of not, I mean, they're not even residents of Ferndale, and they had gone to the Ferndale uh city hall meeting and were up there legitimately yelling and screaming about how drag is grooming children and not appropriate and all this other stuff. And those of us in the queer community that were there were floored. We're like, what? So, it's like they believe their own hype, really. I mean, it's not factual. It's not based on um the facts being set out and then saying, "Okay, well, this is my opinion about them." Right? And that's not what they're doing. They're saying this is, not appropriate at all. We don't want this to be here. They are groomers, they are this, they are that. Um And they've tried to get an interview with me. They've tried to get an interview with Queer Humble. And we've noticed that one, I didn't do it, and neither did Queer Humble. Um, with a lot of the stuff that they go over in their videos and whatnot, and how they talk to people, it's nothing like the news. I would call of it more of a podcast, more of something that you can sit and share your opinion on and talk about all day long, but um you're not considered media. You're just considered somebody that has
A platform.
a platform. That's it. It's just like me. Lost Coast Pride is it's a platform. Right? You can either hear me or not hear me, but Lost Coast Pride is a platform. It's something that has gotten off the ground, and it is given a voice and a message to the people in the small towns in the River Valley. We have um, the Eureka Sister Perpetual of Indulgence. We have Redwood Pride, um, the Raven Project, I believe, all up here in Eureka, right? It's all up here, but there's nothing south. So that's what right now Lost Coast Pride covers is the Eel River Valley, and we do Petrolia. We have some people that live there that come to our Pride stuff. We do Rio Dale, Scotia, and we want to work as eventually, and not necessarily Lost Coast Pride, but going Southern Humboldt, having another organization down there, right? So that we have connections. Um, but it's just a platform. It's not anything that I would say is, a news thing. I wouldn't get up there if I had a podcast for Lost Coast Pride, I wouldn't say, "Oh, yeah, I'm the press," and start hanging cameras on me. And that's not how that works. Um, so I don't, and I know a lot of people, and including journalists for Some of the other papers and websites do not consider them press at all.
Yeah, but you could make an argument that a lot of people don't consider those journalists part of the press as
Right.
well.
Well, also, I won't say as to who, but people that work for the county and stuff, they're not considered a legitimate um, news source.
It would just depend on what we're defining that as, right? Because everything has to start from somewhere before it gets to that point
Right.
where it's mainstream,
Right.
right? Kim Kemp, Red-Headed Black Belt. I mean, all
Right.
that you have these organizations that are grassroots
Right.
movements,
Yeah, they
and then
are.
they grow into this thing that becomes well respected
Hmm.
and part of the
Right.
community message,
Right.
right?
Yes, but I
You
I
could
don't.
definitely argue maybe he's not there yet, or
Well, and
maybe he
he's
won't get there.
well because he's not part of the community. He's not. Okay. He's
But what does
part of
that mean?
his community,
Okay.
right? So he's not inclusive of the whole community. Um,
But
you know,
does that disqualify you from being a journalist?
no, I think mm, that doesn't disqualify you from being a journalist at all. But when you're talking journalism, unless you're Fox News and your opinion is everything, that's basically what um at least I feel it is what he is. It's like a Fox News of running around with like a chicken with the head cut off. Guess what's bad now? Guess what's bad now? Um, right. So I mean, you're not being uh, other news sources here in Humboldt County, Eureka, and even nationwide. They cover almost every part of their community, right? So they give you, what's going on with the arts. They give you what's going on with this, and people put LGBTQ stuff in there all the time. Whether it's TV, whether it's newspapers or whatnot, whether it's just a webcast or whatever, that is include all of your community and you include all of um other than just your opinion, right? That to me is legitimate, right? You're going beyond um just what your little bubble says. Okay, and you're finding news, you're finding facts, you're out in your community, you see the whole community, um, not just there's my opinion on this now hot button.
But he was out in the community covering that story. Doesn't that kind of track with what you're saying? Is that he went there to this event that you could argue wasn't a part of his community and still covered it?
Yeah, but here's the thing is that with that, it's intentionally looking for something bad.
You just think he had ulterior
I
motives
do.
in covering it.
I do. Yeah, and covering it. I mean, he went in with his cameras, right, while everyone else was outside causing a ruckus.
But I believe he wasn't a part of the
No,
protest.
no, he was there.
No, he was there. I don't think he was a part of that protest, though.
Yet he was. Those were his friends because he sat talking to them afterwards. Right? When we're all busting down our stuff, they're still sitting outside and he's part of it and those are his buddies. Um, even at the after that when they went to the Eureka City Council meeting and wanted to express their opinion about the drag show and stuff that happened for Pride. Um he literally got up there, after somebody else had gotten up and said, "I'm part of this, blah, blah, blah," and he got up there afterwards, and it made it seem like they didn't know each other, right? But as soon as they were done speaking, they all got up together and left, right? So,
I do believe he said when we were talking on the podcast that he was buddies with a couple of the people that were involved in that movement, but I
mhm,
think he made or tried to make the distinction that he was there as a Lost Coast representative. He's very aware of separating his personal beliefs from the beliefs attached to Lost Coast Populist, or at least tries to be, and that was my
right.
understanding when I was talking with him.
There's no separation of that. Those are his buddies. Those are who he hangs around with all the time.
So you don't think a journalist can be impartial? to who they're around.
Not when that constant um um message feedback is the same opinion you have.
I don't think we have any real journalists in the US then.
Mm-mm. Well, not really. No, because you're not all, like for me. Not all of my friends are in agreement on certain topics, right? Like we can agree to disagree, except for when it erases my existence. So, but other things, just because I have a friend that I hang out with that likes NASCAR like I do, right? If I'm hanging around a bunch of people that nothing but NASCAR, right? Then it's all my friends, nothing but NASCAR. Um, Growing and putting yourself out of that, right? um Making friends where you have friends over here that have a different opinion, or a different perspective, or that's just it. You go out of that circle and you seek your other members in your community to learn and grow, right? Now, I've been asked by them to do an interview and I refuse to because they're not listening. They hear you, they're not listening. They don't want to listen. They want to find fault, right? To me, a journalist goes out to not find fault, just to figure out the facts. And when you go out to find fault, find something wrong, right? You're going out to perpetuate your belief. It's very hard to separate that. It's very hard to separate that from your friends, right? Like, especially ones you always hang out with and you're always seen with at every event. Um, that's just it. It's hard to separate that opinion from your journalism, right? Um, and that's just what it becomes. This is just uh,
You
you're
become who you're around.
right. Basically, that's really what you become, and everybody concentrates on what this says, right? What this rule is, what this should be, and that's not necessarily journalism. To me, journalism is whether you agree with it or not, or whether you have knowledge of it or not. You're going fact checking. So, like, you had questions for me for this podcast, right? So you have a legitimate set of questions for every time that I've gone and I've done a TV interview or radio or whatever. It's always a set of
I
questions
don't
of
have
what.
any questions prepared.
Well,
That's why I'm a podcaster, though.
right. Well, but I mean, we can discuss. We know the topic that we're discussing, and it can vary. But when you're a journalist and you're doing that, you have a set of questions, and you're like, okay, this is what I wanted to ask you, or what about this, or what about that. That to me is fact finding. That to me is learning something new. You're like, oh, well, oh, I didn't know that. Okay, that's great. Even a journalist can learn something new, right? So, um, to me, I think that when you're going and you're always trying to find fault and you're always trying to protest um, certain people, you're not doing journalism. You're going to those events to protest that. I've watched Donnie and his little cohorts comments on a lot of social media about going to drag shows and kind of not necessarily making a big deal, but kind of disrupting him a little bit because we know who he is, right? So we know who a lot of his cohorts are. We're not dumb. So we know that they talk amongst themselves on our social medias, like, oh yeah, look, they're having, yeah, they did it for the drag show in Ferndale, and I watched them on the social media. I'm like, do they think that we're stupid? Right? I've blocked them on my social media. Queer Humboldt has done the same because they have done nothing but poke, 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 harass, harass, harass on those social media outlets. So I don't find that journalism. I've been contacted by journalists here. That's not what they do. They're trying to find facts. They're trying to honestly get your perspective. right? And try to understand what you're trying to get across. That's not what he does.
I really like your view of what a journalist stands for. It's a
Mhm.
very optimistic view. I like that a lot. I don't think a lot of journalists fall into that
Not
realm,
anymore.
if we're being critical
Right.
of that.
Right, not anymore. There are a few that I know that are phenomenal, and that's what they do, right? They take their job, their journalism seriously, knowing that they have people that read, like Kim Kemp, right? I mean, knowing that they read these things. And so they go and they find facts and they're like, here, this is what's going on here. With all of that, that's what they're doing.
They just present the information and let you form your own opinion.
Right, exactly. They're not saying, "Oh, and da 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 da. This is how you should do it. This is wrong." And even though I did this article, that's not how that works, right? I just think that giving them more of a voice than the one that they have tried to establish. Um, I know that sounds
Worrying?
right. Exactly. Um, it's great that, hey, we have freedom of speech, but you also suffer from the consequences of freedom of speech. And that's what people don't understand. So if you go out and you're like, I have freedom of speech, it's the First Amendment. Yes, perfect. You have freedom of speech, but you also get to suffer the consequences of that. So if your opinion is not either a popular one or you're being hateful or you're being inaccurate on purpose, um, yeah, right? Do you see where that gets you? People are going to start going, "Oh, you know what? We don't trust you anymore. We don't. This is not something that um, we feel is appropriate. So we're gonna go somewhere else. We're not gonna listen to you anymore, or we're not gonna go to your business anymore, or whatever. You have First Amendment rights."
Well, that's the free market, right? You get to put out whatever you wanna put out, and
Mhm.
people get to choose whether or not they wanna be a part of that.
Yes,
Or you think certain there should be limitations on
I
that.
think. Yes, I think there should be. I think there should be all that hateful crap should be. Um, it doesn't need to be seen, and we've got
But
so much bigotry going on. It's not even funny. So
what is defined as hateful behavior? 'Cause it seems like it's a spectrum.
it is. It can be. It can be different for everybody, but we can't go and publish certain hmm,
Slander?
slander. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Without consequences to that, right? So if you're publishing something or you're doing something on, social media and you're slandering a bunch of people or you're slandering an individual, right? You can be held liable for that. We've had um we have a lawyer that looks into, hey, is this something that uh we need to write a letter of cease and desist because that's slander. And the marquee sign this last time, getting the very first drag show canceled. Of course, it's only the venue that got canceled. um Literally, that could be taken as slander against the venue that we were going to have. I mean, it would have been slander. They could have taken it up, loss of money, that kind of thing, right? So um but what you say can come back to haunt you, right? It doesn't matter whether say it publicly or you're just with a couple of your friends. What you say can come back to haunt you. Words have an effect. Most preachers and stuff know that. They know how to use words to affect their congregation, right? So it's something they're taught. Um, so words have an impact and they have consequences. right? So if your words are hateful and you're putting them out there and people are like no longer wanting to put up with your crap or your hateful rhetoric or, your hateful books in your bookstore, they're going to stop coming. They're going to start writing reviews. They're going to start this is social media, man. You can't get away with nothing practically.
So then don't we already have the restrictions in place that you would want with the free market and with the hate speech laws?
See, that's the thing. Usually with the hate speech and stuff, it's more focused on race, not necessarily
Sex or sexual identity.
sexual identity, gender identity, right? I know that state of California is a little bit different. Hate crimes are a little bit different here and how they're prosecuted and that kind of thing, as opposed to a lot of states in the South and Midwest. So hate crimes, you don't get away with nothing, right? You're gonna show somebody and make any kind of LGBTQ queer slur or something, you can, be held accountable for that, right? And any kind of threats that come over legitimately as far as like, we're gonna be there to, um, kick your ass or whatever else, right?
Threats of
So,
violence.
right, threats of violence. So, um, those are okay, but here's the thing. Mm, What's usually not covered right now is gender identity, right? Um,
Well, in some ways it is, right? The old Twitter, this is what I always jump back to is you couldn't dead name. So if
mhm,
you use somebody's former
right.
name, you would get permanently banned.
Right, right. So in some ways, yes. In a lot of ways, no. I mean, there's still transgender women of color being killed just for being who they are, right? So um, they don't have protections of, hey, that's a hate crime, that's slander, that's you can be held liable for that. Um, there's only a few places, the few states that do have any kind of protections for specifically for transgender persons. Um, or some that they're limited at this point, right? And then others, there's absolutely nothing on the books to protect them. Nothing. Um, and here, even though we have protections in the state of California, because we're so rural and everything else, mm, a lot of times people don't think it applies to them. Right? Oh, we're in like a hidden part of California. That's not going to apply to me. It does. Your words have an effect, and um, hateful ones seem to fire up that hateful base faster than you can blink. Right? So we for sure had several people that had said that they were going to be there to protest our first drag show, which was at the Ferndale Rup. Um, And they were just adamant about, "Hey, we're gonna be there," and we even got security for that, right? Which was fine. I would rather provide security anyway. Um, Not a single protester, not a single one, and they were throwing this big fit. Well, now we're having an all ages one at College of the Redwoods. The good news about that is that protesters are not allowed on campus, and security and the campus police force will be looking for anybody who's got, unless they're authorized, cameras hooked up. And
You can't protest. It's a public campus.
mm, no, protesters, I was informed that protesters are not allowed on campus.
That seems absurd because protests happen at campuses all the time, all over the country.
Right. So I'm not really sure. I thought for sure they'd be able to come up and park in the parking lot. And as far as I know,
When it's a
no.
public campus, that seems
Right.
outrageous that they
I
could
don't
block that.
know. I don't know. Well, it is on a weekend for one. Um,
But still a public campus.
right. So I don't know where that came from. They just informed me that no, the protesters have to be off campus. I was like, oh, okay. Because otherwise we have a what they call a rainbow umbrella brigade, and that's basically if protesters are in a central area. which is usually how that happens. Then these people, volunteers, get up with their umbrellas and they pop them open, and they stand directly like in front of the protesters, and it blocks the protesters from the kids and the kids from the protesters, right? So that was our original plan, but then I was told that protesters had to be off campus. And I'm not sure why, because I thought that that would, like you, I thought, oh, okay,
Yeah, I'll have to check into that because that seems
right.
seems like it would be an insane precedent for them to set out there.
Right. So I wasn't really sure, but they just said, nope, no protesters. If they're formally if they're there to protest or whatever, they'll be asked to be somewhere not on campus, and then maybe on the road or somewhere legit holding signs. I don't know, but and then if they get caught on campus, they're going to be escorted off. So I was like, oh, I had no idea that was a thing. I thought that legitimately you could have protests on campus, but for this, I guess not.
Wow.
So, yeah, I was kinda surprised myself. So, just interesting that they had just made it that way, because we were already prepared to.
And you guys were expecting a lot of protesters at this one?
Oh, we were expecting a lot of protesters at this one because it's kids can attend.
That seems to be the recurring theme is it's the kid aspect that
Right.
seems to be drawing all the
Well,
attention.
they just seem to think that we're grooming their children.
Well, the grooming thing gets thrown around so much, right? It's
Right.
tossed around. It's
Mhm.
like throwing around races today. Like,
Right.
what does that really mean? What are we talking about here?
Well, here's the thing. I'm a parent. I have a daughter. I have almost 7 grandkids. One's on its way. So, um it I d mm, it never makes any sense to me, and like I said, I'm a parent, I'm a grandfather, and as a parent, we all groom our children. We groom them to be how we want them to be and where we want them to go, right? I was a little bit better about it with my daughter because I told her, "Hey, you can be whoever," and I raised her to be open-minded and that kind of thing. But we groom our children how we want them to go. So you could almost legitimately call everything grooming, especially if it's something that you're trying to get your child to always do. That's the definition of grooming, right? Not once have I noticed in this country of a case of a drag queen or anybody that does drag grooming a child, right? Um, Never have I seen, a drag queen get, you know, or somebody that does drag get picked up for the, to catch a predator, right? I've never seen any of that. But we're always grooming our children and our grandchildren to be a certain way. So when they say that we're grooming children, I'm like, we're not even around children that long enough to groom your child, right? And if it's any kind of show, then there's nobody picking up your kid and taking them backstage. That doesn't happen, right? That just they're worried about they have sexualized drag.
But in a way, it ties back to in a way, it is a sexual thing by nature.
Not necessarily. See, drag has been done for centuries. Before women could actually perform in theater, men did all the parts, right? That's Juliet was a drag queen. So, I mean,
From Romeo and Juliet?
yeah,
I
I
did not
mean,
know that.
right. Well, because back then women could not perform in the theater. So men did all of the parts. They played all the roles, male, female, whatever. That's all they did. Even back in Roman, that men played women parts. They didn't allow women into theater. So everybody was a drag queen. Um,
But there's that sexual proclivity where you get turned on. Some people, not obviously not all of them,
mhm.
some people do get turned on by dressing as the opposite sex.
Right. And I would call that person a transvestite.
I thought we couldn't say that word anymore. Or is that just what they throw around like, "Oh, you can't say that?"
Right, yeah, and we're under literally, it's under the trans umbrella, but that's just it. If there's somebody that gets turned on by wearing women's clothing, that's totally different than a drag queen.
But what if they are a drag queen as well?
Usually not the case, but if they are, that's not that's something that's more appropriate for them to be. They usually themselves know, "Hey, I can't do this around kids. I need to be with
Yeah, but that's
adults."
putting a lot of trust in people to make the
It
right
is.
decision.
It is putting a lot of trust in that, but here's the thing, I'm putting a lot of trust in somebody getting behind a four-wheel drive vehicle and knowing how in and expecting them to know how to use it, and it's not always the case, right? We are, as individuals, um, our own individual. But, for instance, in our community, in the drag community, right, um, everybody's known. People know who the drag queens are. People know each other, right? There's different drag troops in town, and they all know each other. They all have main people they talk to. So if there's any, oh, this person, right? Yeah, no, that person doesn't get asked.
Yeah, but that's not the greatest litmus test, right? People get away with
No.
stuff from close friends, from
Oh, of
loved
course,
ones all the
of
time.
course, of course. So on the flip side of that, we've got people who are pedophiles, right? There's people, and pedophiles are usually straight. Um, imagine that. Um, but we have people that run around, as having images in their head and all this other stuff, and yet they have legitimate jobs. We don't necessarily know that that person is a pedophile, right? Until they're called out or they get caught or whatever. We don't know. So, am I supposed to vet every person that comes near my grandkids? Am I supposed to vet every person that comes into my life? Yeah, that's my job. That's for me to figure that out. And if I figure out that somebody that I know is a pedophile, I'm out. And that's just it. If that person is caught, it's a different story. But if that person's not caught and they're working with children, what do you say to that? That's like saying, okay, like you said, there's a drag queen that also likes women dressing in women's clothing, gets turned on by that. Now, that's not something that I know, but as soon as I do, that person's out. That person doesn't even get asked to be part of any part of the community, especially the drag community, unless they're doing an adult show.
Well, that's what I've heard from most people who are opposed to that stance is that they're not opposed to drag shows. They're
Hmm.
opposed to the aspect of doing this for kids.
Right. And because they associate an adult drag show with a kids one.
But isn't that what kinda came out with the Redwood Pride drag show, is there was gyrating, there was the tipping, there were these standards that
Okay.
you might not attribute to your own, but that
Right.
were present in this one. So, I mean, you're
I
kind of in
believe
that
because it
boat.
right, I believe because that drag show was kinda like after the pandemic and everything else, it was first drag show, and I don't think that it was necessarily, thought through because, typically when we do a drag show, there's tipping and whatnot, and I don't think that that was thought through as far as for a kid's show. That show was, it wasn't very long. It was kind of not last minute thrown together. Everybody knew what they were going to do,
But
but
pretty quickly put
right, but
together.
pretty quickly put together, right? So, I don't think that those rules and um standards had been thought about and thought, okay, you know what, we need to change this. This is a method we need to change. Um, so that when we do kids shows, they're like a kids variety show and not like, like I said, there's no tipping at at Lost Coast Pride show. None. We don't want it that way. We want clothing above board. We want the performers are already paid. You want to take photos and stuff, there's a booth that will be there that's for photos for everybody to kind of legitimately do after the show. They want to take, if the performers are up for doing pictures or whatever, they want to take pictures with the performers, then they can do little selfies, and at the end of the performance will be a group photo, right? Which is what we did for the drag show at the Ferndale Rep. We didn't have video cameras or anything else set up there and we didn't allow people to take pictures until group picture at the end, or if they wanted to take individual pictures with the performers at the end of the night. So that's just it. It's making the performers safe. It's making th- the staff safe, and it's certainly making the children safe. Um, we want them to feel included. And I think that that's a lot of what doesn't happen is that they don't get included in things like that.
Well, I think the fear is that the inclusion of children in certain things can be potentially problematic because they are so
Mhm.
malleable that if you put
Right.
children in a situation where there's an influence that maybe you deem
Mhm.
not the best,
Right.
they could go down that path.
But that's just it. Most of the people that are bringing their children there, I don't see anybody else as a protester bringing their kids to a drag show. Everybody that's there, the parents and children want to go.
But then that ties back into the argument for like a strip club. If I want my
Right.
kid to go, if I want to go with my
Right.
nine-year-old to a strip club, should we be able to go
Well, see,
watch
that's
the pole
just it.
dancers?
Like that, it a strip club is people getting like either mostly naked or naked, right?
What
Um,
if they were just pole dancers?
Even that to me sometimes is questionable, right? Because of depending on the outfits. Um, Pole dancers usually have really skimpy outfits on and whatnot, just to kind of be for entertainment. And that's an adult situation. To me,
But you
I
don't
know it's
attribute that.
exercise. I know some people use it as exercise,
Some people
right?
get jacked doing it, yeah.
Right, right.
But you
So,
wouldn't extend that same level of caution to an all-age drag show.
um, well, that's why we're taking the precautions that we are,
But you
right?
don't think the act of it is
No.
similar? No.
No, I don't think the act of it is similar at all. I'm literally dressing in a costume as Pumbaa and doing Hakuna Matata. So I don't see that as being a standard that a child shouldn't see,
Well,
right?
and that might not be something that people think of when they think of drag.
Right, right. Drag is entertainment. It's all it ever is entertainment, right? Some people, when they do drag, they enjoy doing it. They love performing. They love getting out there. They love being around the crowd. Um, some people are straight. Some people are gay. Some people are cisgendered. Some people are, trans. It doesn't matter. I've had straight men get up and do drag, right? And have a good time doing it. Um, and they brought their kids to the show. And it was at the time there was dancing, but there was no like overtly badly sexual stuff at this show because we knew people would be showing up as families, and this was 20 something years ago. So, now literally drag is just entertainment, and it depends on the degree of age, honestly,
So do you think
of
that there are certain drag shows that are kinda bringing you all down because they're putting on these all-age drag shows that aren't appropriate for children, and then you guys
yeah,
get
because I
lumped
don't
into
think that
that?
they're thinking it through, to be honest.
They're just treating it like an all-age or just like a
Right,
drag show would
right,
normally be.
right, except for, they may not have the gyrating stuff, but they do have, like, our none of our songs will have any kind of swear word in it. None. None of the songs being performed have swear words in them. We've already gone over it. Um, everybody has had to turn their music in. They've already had to have their costuming approved. So yeah, we're putting a lot into this as a kids drag show. But really it's entertainment, it's costuming. It's literally someone getting in a costume and getting up and performing, whether it's lip syncing or actually singing or whatever. Drag is costuming. right? It's not inherently sexual. It's just someone being in a different outfit. Today we have every type of of person out there, and we're okay with women wearing pants and flannel, and we're okay with them being in drag, right? But God's forbid that you let a man walk around outside going to work or whatever in a dress, because then it becomes sexual when it's not. We don't consider women dressing in men's jeans and boots as you're in drag, you're being sexual.
No, but we do consider women's clothing sexual in a
Right.
lot of
We
circumstances.
do. And here's the thing, clothing has no gender. We've genderized it, but clothing has no gender. If you're in a dress and you're female, you're in a dress and you're female. If you're in a dress and you're male, you're in a dress and you're male. That makes that male clothing, right? You're male. Doesn't mean that you're gay. It doesn't mean, I don't know if you've seen it. It's been going around social media. There's a guy, a business guy, really, he's older, a really handsome guy, built, wears skirts and high heels to work every day. He's not gay. He's straight, right? Has kids, has a wife, has all this, but he goes in that stuff because he's like, why is this gendered clothing? I feel good in this clothing.
Do you think that's a sexual thing?
Not at all. I don't think it's a sexual thing at all. Clothing in and of itself is not sexual. We have sexualized clothing. We have sexualized so many things, right? And put sexual connotations on stuff, right? When I was before I went through my transition, I'd always even as a kid, I hardly ever thank God, I hardly ever wore a dress or a skirt, but unless I was forced to. But I was wearing boys' clothing, but it was my clothing. It's just clothing, right? And so we have shoved people into these little, boxes that they're supposed to be in. When Catholic priests still wear robes, that's considered a dress.
Well, people wear kilts.
I
I
do.
mean, traditions change.
Right, I wear kilts. I'm Scottish and Irish, I wear kilts, right? We don't consider that feminine. As a matter of fact, "Ooh, a man in a kilt," right? I've heard that so many times, right? So we don't consider that feminine, but in essence, the today's kilts look like skirts, right? I don't consider it that. We have put a gender to clothing, and we have sexualized it. It's okay for women to wear men's jeans and men's boots, but it's not okay for men to wear a dress because, oh, that's feminine, and now you're gay, and now I have questions about you. When in actuality, we have priests in robes, we have kilts, we have, um, you know, well, if you really consider it, the Klan wears robes, so I'm assuming that that could be considered a dress. We feminize things. And when we make it feminism, anything feminine second to everything else. If it's not butch and masculine, then you're queer. Um, and if you're butch and masculine, then you're a dyke or you're a lesbian, or so that's okay. We consider that okay because of porn. That's okay, but we don't want to have that feminism or that feminist kind of thought. Men are not supposed to be feminists, right? Men are not supposed to wear dresses. Why? Because then you're gay, or there's something wrong with you, or you're out to get my kid. Um, we don't. It's what standards we've put on things that makes it for future generations seem like it's a bad thing, and I don't believe it is. I don't believe that drag shows for kids have to be this. You're sexualizing it. No, I'm not. I'm making a drag show for kids. I'm making a variety show for kids so that they can have entertainment too. And just because somebody is in drag doesn't mean that that person is out to get your children. Um, More often than not, um, we are going to ensure that the children that we have, any kind of children's shows we have in the future, will be like this one. It will be no filming, no bad language, no inappropriate songs, none of that. Um, because while the children aren't worried about their safety, we're worried about their safety. Um, and while they're just there to have a good time and see all the shows, we want to make sure that what they see is appropriate.
Don't you think that in filming, you might be able to calm some of the people that are
Well,
against
that's
that?
just it. We will have designated filmers. So, and it'll be released. Not all of it, obviously, but most of it will be released. College of the Redwoods will have their media. And then, we'll have our social media where we can release some of the performances and whatnot, right? Showing exactly and I'm more than happy to share that with any kind of news outlet if they want to look at that. But yeah, there's no um filming. Now we did have at our last show, we had someone from the North Coast Journal and their photographer, and they had specific permission to go and take pictures of performers, ask, and I know that the reporter was there asking questions, but um they went around and they went backstage and legitimately asked every performer, "Hey, is it alright if I take your picture?" Right? That's how we got around that. And we'll do that again for this next show. "Hey, can I take your picture?" And that'll be kinda like in the media and whatnot. But for us ourselves, it's us filming, um, the stage, and it's filming the performers themselves, um, and it'll go out, and it'll be there. This is what our drag show was, right? This is what a drag show is for kids. Um, it needs to be above board. I'm like I said, I'm a father and a grandfather. I would never let my daughter, who got raised in the, in the community, go to a show that was like that ever. But nor would I let my grandkids. No, if it's a show that's for adults, and usually those shows are not during the daytime, they're at night, right? So, um, if it's a show that is for kids, yeah, I'm all about. I would take my grandkids in a heartbeat. Um, but if it's an adult show, nobody should be there with their children in the first place. This just happened to be a pride thing that happened in the middle of the day. So, since that happened, it's learning and growing. And because I have experience um, with drag community, and not for a while, but I also have experience with the trans community. And I know that a lot of things that come out with trans, I've done panels, I've done all sorts of stuff as a transgender person, to know that what we can and can't do, what needs to happen in order to have a successful kids drag show.
Do you mind if I ask you about your own personal story and
Sure,
how
go ahead.
you knew how did you know that you were trans?
Well, when I was growing up, and I have two younger brothers. When I was growing up, um, not only did I think I was a boy, my father raised me like one. So until I hit puberty, was like, I'm a boy. And then I hit puberty, and it all went to shit from there. Um, but my transition happened. Now, like I said, I was doing drag in Reading in around 96, 97, um, and I became comfortable in my own skin. My mom went to San Francisco State University and got a minor in human sexuality. So my mom already knew about trans stuff even back then. And I was doing drag and I got comfortable in my skin. I was very large chested, right? So with a large chest, I went to the doctor, one a plastic surgeon there, and he was like, "Hey, I can take you down to fit your lifestyle and all this other stuff." And went home with my because my mom was at the appointment with me. I went home with her and I was like, "Yeah, I don't understand what he's saying." My mom's like, "You know what? You've always been a boy. Be one." And I bawled because it was just like not permission, but I was seen, right? Um, and I came. Let's see, I came out in July of '98, had top surgery in September of '98, and started testosterone 2 weeks later.
And this was after your time in the military.
Hmm. Yeah, I had come out. I had actually gotten out during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. When I came out as a lesbian because I didn't know any other title. I didn't quite fit. I was like, no, but this is as close as I'm gonna get. And then I got out in '94, and then 4 years later, I transitioned, and I was like, oh, this is what I was looking for. Since then, um, I've always made it my mission because in 1998, I didn't have any information. Internet was still relatively new. Um, yeah, I didn't have any sources. I didn't have any groups. I didn't have nothing, and I was stuck in Reading with no support, no nothing. Um, my best friend helped me, go through my transition, and my mom, and the time my first wife. But you know, uh, from that time, I was like, you know what? I am not going to hide myself. I don't have somebody I can see. I don't have somebody I can look at or talk to, but I'm going to make damn sure that somebody else does. So I did panels, educational panels at Shasta College. And I did human sexuality classes and some science classes and that kind of thing, and talked about being trans. And there's not a question I haven't been asked in 25 years. Not a question I haven't been asked, legitimate or otherwise. And from there, I moved here. I'd spent a lot of my childhood summers here, so in Humboldt County, and so we moved. My first wife and I moved here, and she went to HSU, and I gave talks up there. I believe I gave one. Oh, I came out to my Photoshop 6 class by doing a collage of my before and after pictures. But I've given all sorts of talks throughout um, the time I've transitioned throughout the last 25 years, including to for military and hospitals and doctors' offices and all sorts of stuff. Because of my not having somebody to see, nothing tangible, right? So I made it my mission to do that for somebody else. So there's a lot that I still continue to do. I still get asked to do panels. I still get asked to do talks. I still get asked to educate. Right? Mm, I'm I'm considered a trans elder because I transitioned so long ago. Um, and I've made it through so much BS, and I still have to. Amazingly enough, I still get things, slung at me as far as like verbal slurs and that kind of thing because I'm not shy. All of my ball caps or my t-shirts or my jackets or whatever all have some sort of pride thing on them. Um, I don't mind being that face. And yeah, I've been beat up. I've been all sorts. But here's the thing. I've had an effect. It's been a ripple effect. And it's been great, but I've had an effect. I've helped people through their transitions. I've answered questions. I've shown people that longevity as a trans person is possible. It's legitimately been by the some of the younger generation of I didn't know there were older trans people or there were trans people older that old, right? Because not visible. And I'm not talking about trans women, I'm talking a lot about trans men. Um we have unfortunately, we have more passing privilege than a trans woman does, right? So we can start growing facial hair and everything else and disappear, right? Nobody would know, nobody would clock us. But the problem is that those people who don't know about what it means to be trans, or they think they might be, but they don't have an example. They don't have somebody who's been through it. They don't have somebody they can ask, right? And that's important. And so, not just me, but several. I mean, I'm way out, but several people, are out just to be visible. And then others are not. They're stealth, but they're still doing advocacy, especially being in a group of people and people don't know that they're trans and be like, hey, man, that's not an okay thing to say. Why you got to say something like that? And just calling people out, changing people's opinions the stealth way. Whereas I'm changing how people see themselves, right? And I could be changing people's opinions about trans just being out. So it's not all about just being out. It's just about being an advocate. And that's what I've done for 25 years of my life. Next year will be 26, and I will have lived half my life as my authentic self.
Is that
And
crazy to say? Is that a weird
yes,
feeling?
yes, and that next year's birthday is important, right? Because I've made half of my life as my authentic self. Um, it's an important thing to say. It's important for me. I feel like I've gotten farther than I thought I would. Um, but it's also an important thing for other people to know that, oh my God, this person actually just spent half their life being who they are. It's possible, right? It's possible to go through life just being your authentic self. Um, so I started that years ago and I continue to do it. And with Lost Coast Pride, getting that up off the ground and being asked to do it. And then I was like, we need something for Eel River Valley, right? It was just another part of my advocacy of being seen. Not that I want to like have, wear all the crowns and be all the pop and no. No, I'm more of a homebody. But this is important. And having something like this is to be seen, it's to be heard, it's to let people know um in the Eel River Valley in, Eureka in Humboldt County. They were here and we're not going anywhere and come see us. There are other people like you here. You don't have to hide. You don't have to be in a closet here because we are in a rural closet here, basically. You don't have to be. There are other people like you here. And it's important that we do that.
Do you have any regrets about transitioning? Do you ever think about what would have happened if you went the other way?
Oh, I wouldn't be here right now. I wouldn't be
It
here
was
right
that
now.
bad.
Yeah, it was that bad. I would not legitimately be on this planet anymore. Um, I was to the point where I couldn't take it. Um,
Just being in that body.
yes, yes. My chest size was a 44 double D. My chest preceded me by 5 minutes everywhere I went, right? So having that removed, I probably could have gone just with that. And it's not that I have a problem with breasts, just breasts on me. I couldn't do it. My brain, genetically, I'm male. I've been tested. I'm male. So this is why I don't understand people who go, "Ah, trans is not a real thing."
What does that mean genetically you're male?
So genetically, all that chemical and wonderful things that go on with your body, um, I don't my body just didn't develop past what I was born as.
What about chromosome-wise?
Right. So, um, yeah, all of that, all my brain function, all my everything else, even when I was a kid and I was shaving my chin. So everything for me was already male except for my body.
Wait, does that mean your chromosomes were XX?
N no, it didn't quite make it there because that's a physical attribute, right? So, it didn't quite make it there, like, my body didn't quite make it up to the rest of the chemicals and biology going on in the brain and some other parts of my body. So, like, for instance, genetically or intersexed, right? Any part that you don't necessarily have to have genitals or two of the same type of genitals, or not same type, but two different types of genitals, right? That's not something like a physical attribute on the outside. It could also be inside. So you can also still have like female bodied is gonads, right? Which is basically testicles that didn't drop.
And they would be inside of your body?
Mhm.
And you had that?
Yes. So I have, um, that and, just the chemical makeup in my system, right? Other than me taking testosterone, the balance of those chemicals, um, and the codes in my DNA didn't quite physically match up with what I still have, right? So, um when I was assigned female at birth, nothing on the outside of my body showed anything other than assigned female at birth. Everything inside, though, was screaming assigned male at birth. So, uh, brain chemistry, uh, just your DNA genetics, and having um, uh,
Testicles?
yeah, basically, it's the like up inside of you. Yes, yes. So, and assigned female at birth, you can have those. I mean, they're considered like the ovaries and stuff that get transferred and whatnot are all gonads.
Oh, so ovaries come out of balls.
Well, yeah,
Your
like
balls will
so, like
transition
when you're
into the
going through the whole development stage in the womb, right?
I feel like
So,
I need to take a biology lesson, a
right. So when you're
refresher.
going through the whole development stage in the womb, the gonads are either balls or ovaries, right? And it just depends on how your body splits. Now, sometimes your body can be a little confused, and it will not quite
Finish the process.
finish the
Well,
process,
that's
right?
with hermaphrodites, right? Is you have
Yes,
that
basically
split of
intersex. Yes,
okay.
yeah. And you can refer to intersex or hermaphrodites. They do either or. But yes, so when you're telling me that, especially this is what has gotten me about Christianity and that kind of thing, is you're telling me that God doesn't make any mistakes, but yet you're telling me that being intersexed or hermaphrodite or trans, because that could be a brain chemistry thing, not necessarily a body chemistry thing, right? So you're telling me all of that now is a sin, but that's a human condition, right? Intersex, especially, been mutilating children's bodies to try to make them conform to what we wanted them to be. When it turned out when they were older, they weren't they were the opposite gender, so they had to go through transition. So you're telling me what? That's not okay? No, it's a human condition. Being trans is a human condition. Being intersex is a human condition. Being any part of the queer spectrum is a human condition. But people will want to tell you otherwise because of what a book says.
Do you feel like you're a unique situation in that case where your body was trending toward the middle, or is that normally the case that happens with people who transition is their bodies it didn't quite click up all the way somewhere
Right.
down the road?
Yeah, sometimes it's just chemical, right? Other times it's physical. Yes. So, um it can be, or it can be a combination of both, and I had a combination of both, right? But my body didn't develop like it was supposed to.
Do
Um,
you think your perception of yourself would have changed at all had your father raised you differently? Or had you not been around your 2 brothers
no,
or an
no, I
external
think
circumstance
I
like that?
think I think honestly that eventually I would have come to the conclusion that I needed to transition. I needed to have what to be appropriate to me. I don't think anybody was ever an influence on me. And even though my father raised me like a boy, that involves more of the working on cars and doing those kind of typical boy things. Not necessarily saying, "Well, this is,"
Treating you like a boy.
right, right. So I mean, just treating me like one that I just and my it was amazing because he didn't do that with my brothers, but he did it with me. So, but I think honestly, I would have come to the conclusion sooner, probably rather than later, but I would have come to the conclusion. Um, And I believe that if we're not criminalizing somebody transitioning and understanding that it is a human condition, we're not beating somebody up for it. We're not, um, calling them a freak and all this other stuff when it's something that they can't help. Right? It's like somebody who um, gets born with any kind of birthmark. Right? It's a human condition. It happens. And calling people freaks and killing them and treating them badly and whatnot because of a human condition mystifies me to this day. I have yet to understand how and it's really because people sexualized it instead of just recognizing it as a human condition. I got called all sorts of stuff. I got beat up. I got assaulted. I got um, in any way, shape, form. I've had, slurs strung at me, and I've had um, property damage, and I've had all sorts of stuff just because I have a human condition.
Just because you were trans.
Right. Right. And people didn't understand it, nor did they want to. They didn't ask me about it. They don't know me as an individual, but they just figure, oh, you're a freak. So we're going to treat you like one.
Has
And,
that gotten better as you've gotten older? Since you did I mean, you were in the '90s transitioning,
right.
and then to be
It's
where we are
gotten
now.
oh boy. It's gotten I had thought that it had gotten better. And then now with all this, conservative and Republican rhetoric about drag queens and drag time stories and all this other stuff going on about trans women and trans men being killed for being who they are or who they have to be, it seems to have gotten worse. It's like I don't know if in this day and age of everything on the internet, people can't research. People can't take the time to research. They're just going to listen to someone's rhetoric, right? Instead of taking the time to understand scientifically, because science and all, but understand what papers have been written, what things have been said about trans and drag and LGBTQ and none of this was ever a problem for Native Americans. Every tribe had somebody who was two spirit, and that is a white person's word. But they're trans. They're considered you know um, holy because they have perspective of something different, something on either side, right? So how we've come to this day and age of not being able to go on our phones and Google what it means to be trans, what it means to be a drag queen, what it means to be a lesbian, what it means to be non-binary, right? No one wants to take the time to research that. No one wants to take the time to learn that. So they're just going to learn what the media says. And when you've got people who think they're a legitimate media and they start putting that kind of crap out there, then you're not going to get the full picture. You're not going to get an accurate description. They're just putting what they feel is wrong out.
Yes, there's a good way and a bad way to go about it
Mhm.
because there's a lot of evidence or research out there that says, that a lot of kids would grow out of this or just turn out to be gay or lesbian.
Mhm.
And I think that's where a lot of the anger stems from is it seems like there's a push to transition kids younger and younger. And I
This,
think that gits a little alarming for people.
and here's the thing. When I was little, I knew I was a boy, right? If your child comes out and says that, it's your responsibility as an adult to say, okay, well, then let's explore that. Let's figure out, what you mean by that and not feel threatened, for one. Um, and this is the thing, legitimately transitioning, like any kind of surgeries or hormones can't happen until you're 18 in
That's
any
not true.
state.
That's not true. You can do it at 13.
Well, you have to have your parents' permission.
That's also not true. In some states, you to actually can use your parents' insurance, and the insurance
Mm,
company can't tell the parents that you're going through these
that's
treatments.
true. But your family's going to figure it out
Yeah, but
sooner rather than
yeah, but
later, right?
with especially with hormone blockers,
Hmm.
sometimes the damage is done, and it's you can't go back on that. So if your kid's taking hormone blockers for 6 months or a year and then you find out, well, your kid might be sterile or might have these permanent
Mm,
after effects, and you
right.
can't undo that. And I think again, a lot of the alarm is whether there's a lot or a few, there are stories of people who transitioned when they were kids
Right.
and then come out of it and say, I cannot believe my parents let me do this. Somebody should have protected me. I was a
Well,
kid.
and that's just it. The parents should at least, and this is a parental responsibility, right? And this is where you kind of get in one of those areas where, you can't legitimately tell the parents what they can do, and you can't, just kind of let that slide. So, as a parent, like if my daughter were to have ever come up to me and said, "Dad, I think I'm a boy." Okay, well, then let's explore those. Let's find out what that means. Let's educate ourselves and say, okay, that means this, this, and this, and this. Now, you're not going to be able to do this until you're a certain age, till you're old enough to understand what you're doing. Um, including, you know, I didn't have to go through like hormone blockers or anything else. And when it comes to that kind of stuff, I think that kids are legitimately going and doing it themselves because their parents are not listening to them. Their parents are not willing to educate themselves what that means. And then those parents who have with their children and have educated themselves and know the consequences and know what could happen and all of that, if they're going at 15, 16 years old and want to do that or want to go at 13 and they have something where that's a parental and a kid thing and not behind a parent's back and not just insurance handing it out, that's again staying in tune with your kids. And that's a parental thing. You go, okay, you know what? I may not understand it, but let's figure out what that means. Let's figure out what this would entail. Let's research together. Let's do that because then the child knows that you're listening to them for one, and for two, you're educating yourselves together to know what that is.
But should we listen to the kids when it comes to something like that?
Yes.
Shouldn't it? Yeah, but kids are kind of stupid.
Well,
That's the
yes,
problem.
yes and no.
But again, you do have these kids that, because especially in states like California,
Right,
if the kid wants to do it, the parents cannot, they have no intervention. It's not up to
right.
the parents. It is solely up to the discretion of the
Mhm.
kids. And for whatever reason, in the world today, we have forgotten that kids are pretty dumb. Kids make very
Yes.
poor decisions,
Right.
and it's the role of the parent to stop them. Now, when that kid turns 18 or an age
Mhm.
that society decides is acceptable, let them do it. Then your parents
Right.
shouldn't be able to stop you. But these are kids. These are
Right.
kids that don't know literally anything. Even you could argue even people in their 20s. You could argue my age. We
Right.
don't really know.
No.
But to do it so young is just
Well, here's the
insane for such
thing,
a big
like
decision. It's not
right,
like,
for
"Oh, I want
right,
ice cream for lunch."
right. So, I think letting your kids explore what it not letting them explore, especially if they say, "I think I'm a boy," or "I think I'm a girl." Okay, let's explore that. Clothing and, um, you
Less
know,
drastic measures.
less drastic measures. Like, let's explore that. Let's see what this means for you and for me as a parent, right? So let's see what that it means and let's explore this. And sometimes that child, because you've let them do that, are gonna go right out of it and be like, okay, I don't want to do this all the time, right? Maybe sometimes I would like to do this and that's okay as well, but not necessarily all the time. That means they don't want to necessarily transition. They would just like to maybe do drag or whatever. Male or female, it doesn't matter. Whatever body they came in, that they can do that. And I think less drastic measures for that. Now having that and your child, you've gone up, say the child was 6 or 7 when they said that. And they've gone through this whole thing and they have legitimately been wearing what they want to wear as far as representing the gender that they are. And at 13, say, okay, this is a next step up. Let's do some research together as a family about what that means. And then if that's something we still want to do, then we do the hormone blockers.
At 13?
13, 14 years old. Yeah,
Doesn't that seem insanely young?
it does, but you start developing in your body.
I know, but then what if you turn 16 and you're like, "This was not the call.
Well,
This was
all you
not what
have
we
to
should have
do is
done."
stop taking them and they literally will start the process.
That's not true. That's not true.
Not all the time, but
No, but
yes.
pretty pretty much across the board, that's not true. The hormone blockers, when you start taking them,
Well,
they're
that
it's
makes
pretty much
sense.
chemical castration is
Well,
what.
I mean, that makes sense because, I mean, when I started taking testosterone, I mean, I stopped having cycles and everything else. So, yeah, that makes sense. Um, it doesn't, it's not all the time. I've had people that have, gotten their children off of them and the blockers and they've just, it was slower, but they started to develop how they needed to.
Yeah, they might
Right.
still develop slightly, but it's never gonna be what it was, and in most
No.
cases, they're not gonna be able to have kids. So if it's a female taking male blockers, I mean,
You really have
you're
to
having
right, and you
problems.
really have to research, and that's something that you have to say, "Hey, if you do this, you're not gonna be able to do
But do
this."
you think a 13-year-old can understand the weight of that choice at 13? Like,
At
doesn't that, I mean,
13,
can you even
depends.
grab
I
that at
mean, in this
18?
scenario where I was like, "Hey, you're with your parent this whole entire time going through, and your parent is helping you," right? In that scenario, you know where you're going.
But what about the detransitioners?
Well, see, that doesn't happen very often.
But it okay, but what is very often? 5% of the time? 15% of the at what point do we say, "Okay, these people matter too?"
Well, that's just it, is that, you're not gonna find a very high percentage of people that are detransitioning.
But we don't know what the percentage is. They've never done that study.
No, they haven't, and mostly because it's not something that a lot of people announce that they're gonna detransition, right?
But the research against that is pretty solid, that most, not
Mhm,
all, would grow out of it if left alone, and there's a lot of good evidence that says some of this is a social contamination aspect, especially among young girls and how it's switched from being predominantly men switching
mhm,
to these teenage girls in these specific social cliques.
mhm.
I mean, there's a lot of evidence that says not intervening would actually be best for them in some cases.
Mhm.
And then the challenging thing is looking at you like it's very apparent, like, this is what you wanted, this is what you needed, and you knew from a young age.
Right.
So
Most
you're
of
at
us
that
do.
yeah, you're at that one side of, "I knew that
Mhm.
this was for me, this has made my life so much better, I feel like I am now who I am."
Right.
But then you have the polar opposite that is,
Mhm.
"I transitioned at 13 and now I wanna kill myself because
Right.
I can't ever go back to who I actually was, and my parents fought this or went along with this, and now I'm this
Mhm.
child who was mutilated by the system, and I can't go back."
Right, and some of it can be, you're supposed to, social media has done so much and so much damage, right?
That's an understatement.
Right. That's done so much for so many people and so much damage at the same time. So, literally to me, um, you're going to always have the opposite of what, like for me, I transitioned and I plowed right through it, right? But you're always going to have the opposite as somebody goes, You know what? This wasn't for me. I need to." Even as an adult, I've had people that I've talked to and I met in person that an older adult, they were like, I transitioned and then it didn't feel right, like complete. And so they transitioned. Um, it was somebody that I had known. They had transitioned from male to female and thought, it wasn't exactly right. And I think I just went above and beyond before I really thought about it, which is why you're supposed to go to counseling. Which is why that's a huge thing even as a child. If that's something you go to counseling, right? And figure out all the ins and outs and the parents can go with you and then you have the counselor yourself. It helps. But they detransitioned, they didn't feel quite right. And so they actually wound up being because they had gone through all the surgeries and stuff that you would go through as someone assigned male at birth, to be a woman. They had to go, and then they now are known as a trans man. So that, literally is something that, because they detransitioned and they had, bilateral mastectomy, and they had things like they no longer, had a penis. So it was, now this is who I am, and now I've got to figure out, So it happens. But a lot of that is due to not having the right counseling or the proper counseling or for long enough. Not having a proper education about, well, there's so much information out there now. I know it's hard to go through, but having a proper education about who you are and where you're going and why you want to do this, that includes having counseling. Um, but it also includes listening to people in your community about, hey, that you need to make sure this is something you really want to do because this is the consequences of doing this. Now, mind you, you can detransition and you can go back. Me, if I detransition, I'm going to be shaving for the rest of my life, right? And now, even if I stop taking hormones, I'm growing hair for the rest of my life. So you really have to think about all it entails and really sit with that with a counselor, with your family, with your friends, and with yourself and make that decision. Um, which is why it's important as a parent that you sit with your children and you say, hey, even if they tell you at the age of 7, I think I'm a boy. I think I'm a girl. I think I'm non-binary. Can I explore that? Um, but say I think I'm a boy. I think I'm a girl. Let them explore that with clothing and toys and things that make them happy that they can legitimately use.
But isn't
Right.
that aren't those all just instruments of things that we've put sex on? Isn't that what we were talking about at the beginning? The
See, but
clothes?
that's just it. If I'd had something that would affirm my gender, right? To what I thought it was. Now, yes, legitimately, I can go out now and be a man in a dress, right? But as a child, they're trying to explore male and female. Like, I think I'm a boy. Okay. Well, boys can do this too. Well, girls can do this too. Right. They can have trucks. They can have dolls. They can explore whatever that means to them. I think I might be a boy. Well, what do you think a boy is?
What do you make of the argument that you shouldn't feed into that at all
Mm,
when they're so young? That could just confuse them and send them down a path that they might not otherwise go down by
mm.
playing into it.
By playing into it, by saying, okay, let's explore that.
Yeah, so if you have a say you have a boy and he
Hmm.
thinks he's a girl and he's 7 years old, and then
Hmm.
you start dressing him up like a girl, you start calling him girl names, you start socializing him to be a girl,
Hmm.
and then maybe he transitions and regrets it or transitions and doesn't, you can't see that part.
No, you
So
can't
you're
see
only at
that
the
part.
start part.
Right. You're at the start part. You're at
So wouldn't it be better to not do anything and let him make that choice when his brain is fully formed enough to be able to understand the gravity of what he's choosing?
but that would have left me in a, well, it did leave me in a quandary because nobody listened to me when I was little.
Yeah, but what if it wouldn't have worked out? What if they did listen to you, you did it, and you
Well, if
regretted
they
it?
did just let me wear, boys' clothes and play with boys' things and just let me be, right? Just let your child be. And just be who they are, right? And if they say, I want, I think I might be a boy. Okay, you know what? Let's try. What does that mean to you? That's sitting down with your child and finding out what it means for them to be them.
But I don't even know what that means at 25. So if you would have asked me that, you could have convinced me to be anything at 7. I could convince anybody under 12 to you could convince them to do anything.
Right, but see that here's the thing. You're not trying to convince your child to be one way or the other. You're letting them explore different things.
Yes, but it's not just your influence. With social media, with these
Mhm.
external things, with teachers, you have
Right.
people influencing your kids, and that can go in one direction or another. You had
Right, it
that
can.
I don't wanna point out, like, bad cases because I know that there are good ones
Mhm.
too, but there was that crazy case of that teacher in Long Island who
Mm.
started calling this girl or referring to her by male pronouns and a male
Mhm.
name,
Mhm.
and the child didn't ask for this. The teacher just started doing this one day, and the child became suicidal. 9 years old, never
Mhm.
wanted to be a boy, never identified it as a boy, none of
Right.
that. The teacher just decided and had been telling students, "Oh, you should try being gay," or, "Oh, you should try being the opposite gender. You might like it." And just picked this one child, this 9-year-old girl in 5th grade
Right.
and just went off the walls.
Those
And
people
I
are
know that
terrible.
is a terrible
Horrible.
example because I
Mhm.
would hope that it is rare, it probably is, but shit like that happens, and then people latch onto that, and then it
See,
blows up.
and again, this is where as a parent, if my daughter had said, "Hey, I think I'm a boy." Okay, let's explore that. What does that mean to you? What does being a boy mean to you, right? And a lot of times at that age, it's like, "Oh, they get to do all this stuff that I don't get to do." Right? But some of that is like for me, if somebody would have just let me be and just said, "Okay, what clothing are you wearing today?" Or "What are you doing today?" Right? Or letting me explore, but also checking in with me again, right? Saying, "Okay, so what how are you doing with this?" That's the responsibility of a parent, right? And yeah, I mean, we like I said, we always groom our children to be how we want them to be instead of them letting them be how they need to be. And if I would have just had the encouragement to just be myself, I was myself anyway, but I had to live under strict rules. I was Baptist and Pentecostal. I wasn't allowed to be, you know, um, even though my father had just, I had so many contradictory things growing up. It wasn't even funny, but even though my father raised me like a boy and kind of taught me all the boy things, when we went to like church and stuff, I had to be the girl and I didn't know how. Um, I still refused to wear dresses at that point, but I didn't know how to be that. I didn't know how to be one. Because it wasn't me, right? But I wasn't allowed to explore that part of me. I didn't have a parent that said, "Hey, you know what? Let's see how yeah, I want you to succeed and stuff in life, but if you legitimately come to me and tell me, "Hey, I think I'm a boy, I think I'm a girl," then okay, let's talk about that. And then if you want to explore that, we explore that. We explain it to your teachers, we do whatever. And then if you checking in 6 months down the road, whatever, year down the road, how are we doing with this? How is this affecting you? Do you want to go back? No, you want to keep going? Okay. You let me know if you want to go back, right? And I know that that seems weird, but um we would let our children explore who they are, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're gonna wanna transition. Maybe that, later on down in life, it's being a drag queen. They love being able to dress up and perform, but they don't wanna do it full time, right? Um, that's about performance. That's about, getting up in there and just being a different character. Because a lot of times kids will associate somebody different as being a character. Right? So it's being a different character, it's dress up, it's being somebody acting, right? Um, and I think that if you just kind of like roll with your kids, and how they feel and their environment, right? They're surrounded by this all the time. And they're surrounded by positive and negative stuff being thrown at them about being queer. Right. And so the parent has to, and I know that we have a lot of parents that are bigoted. So we know that that's not going to happen. But we do have, parents that are not, but they don't know where to start. This is not something in their purview that they even dreamed of. And especially somewhere up here where you don't have access to that. You don't have access to that kind of, oh, my kid is exploring and I don't know what to do. I don't know where my resources are. Yeah, I can look on the internet, but there's so much crap on the internet. You don't know where to start.
Well, and the internet goes back to social media,
Right.
ties into a lot of kids being socialized one way or another.
Right. Instead of finding out, factual and saying, okay, all right, my child said this and this and this. We found some of this. Oops, sorry. We found some of this on the internet, but where's our resources? We need to know. We need to understand. We need to figure it out. And whether this is just I don't, want to be a boy for now, and and I just want to do this for now because that happens,
Well, and
right?
I can't personally attest to this because I'm not a girl, but that's the thing you hear girls when they hit puberty, it's a rough time and they're uncomfortable in their bodies.
Hmm.
And how much does that play into the social contagion aspect of these clusters wanting to transition and be a boy because then I won't feel as shitty as I feel right now.
Right. No, and literally that's why the requirements for um counseling,
But
right?
even that, it's so you could go one time and get put on block. Like the I agree with the
Right.
backstops that you're talking about.
Right.
The problem is those just aren't as engaged as people would wanna believe.
Right.
There seems to be this push the train through mentality once the
Hmm.
child gets on the track.
Right. And but that happens with just about anything that we do with kids, right?
Well, I don't know anything this drastic.
True. I mean, this is just something that instead of having those communications, instead of exploring, instead of researching, it's either people are going and bulging right through that wall, just like blaring through it and be like, "Hey, full bore," right? And then you've got others that are screeching brakes and oh hell no, right? Because there's not those preventative, and I'm not talking about, I'm outlawing any kind of uh, you know, transgender care for any kind of kid, which is what they were trying to do. Any kind of care. Um, but it's also saying, okay, these steps have to be met in order to transition, right? So we have steps at the age of 18 of what has to be met in order to transition. Um,
What do you mean by that?
Not so many okay, so not so many, steps like we used to. Back in the day, you needed letters, you needed all sorts of stuff. Today, it's, a requirement to have, counseling, or it's supposed I think the requirement? I can't remember because I know that some doctors won't do the surgery unless you've had mental health, um
Yeah, but again, that could just be you go to a therapist one time and say, "I'm
no,
trans."
you literally have to go to a therapist, and they have to legitimately talk to you more than once.
Well, I don't believe that's true for children then, because I
No,
have
it's not, but see, those are the steps that we have to take. When we're transitioning, right? We have to go to a counselor, we have to talk to a surgeon, we have to, um, jump through hoops to change our name. We have to there are certain requirements that need to be done before you get that you can say you're trans, but, until you get and then, of course, as an adult, it's not as hard to get surgeries and that kinda thing, but there are steps you still have to take. Um, like I said, there's a lot of surgeons that will not do your surgery until you've had counseling. A lot, most of them actually, will not do your surgery until they know you've had the proper counseling, and this is something you realize the consequences for. Um, those consequences of just barreling through the wall and getting it done leaves room for all sorts of problems to happen, right? Not thinking about okay, hormone blockers, not thinking about their lasting effects, not thinking about name changes or how their school is going to be affected or any of that. You just kind of full bore it.
well, you're in a tough spot if you're a parent and your child comes to you at 9 years old and says, "I'm trans."
Mhm.
You either embrace it and hope
Right,
that they don't choose that this was the wrong decision for them, or you go against it and then you get labeled a bigot, a
right,
homophobe, you get labeled all these things,
right,
and then maybe your kids get taken away from you, or they
right,
just do it anyways. So you're
right,
in a very tough spot
right.
to,
Um,
'cause what do you do? If
well,
you're around your kid and you know in your
right,
gut that, or you have a strong suspicion, I don't really think this is them.
right,
I would support them if it was. I
right,
don't really think this is my kid.
right.
You have no power. That's
Hmm.
the system has overcorrected in one direction so far, probably
Right,
because of the counter correction,
right,
that we're just it baffles me how much power we are giving to children.
right.
That's not that they shouldn't be able to voice their opinions, but they are children.
Yep,
And it's like everybody has just forgotten
right.
we were all
I
kids
would
and
have
kids
never
do stupid
allowed my
shit.
daughter to transition as far as if she were to transition, um, I wouldn't have been okay with surgeries and that
Medical
right,
intervention.
medical
That's
intervention.
where we should yeah, if you
Right.
wanna play with boys' toys or girls' toys, yeah, that's fine. If
You
you
wanna
wanna
dress up, you
chemically
wanna
castrate yourself, maybe we wait till you're 18, and then you
right.
can understand where that goes.
Well, part of the problem is that even as young adults and teenagers, they are experiencing, um, dysphoria and dysmorphia. They experience that, and, when um you're at a place in your life, even if you're just still a kid, you're at a place in your life where your body is not matching up with your brain, and you because I know adults who will give anything to be able to afford to have top surgery because they're so dysphoric, because their body is not matching up with their brain, and I know that is happening with 12 and 13-year-olds. Their body's not matching up with their brain, and it's tearing them apart. I don't think anybody really realizes what it's like to have that. And the reason why you would at least want some middle ground, right? At least learning how to use, like, for assigned female at birth, using binders.
Yeah, but even binders have consequences. They can mess with
Hmm.
your rib cage, they can
They
affect your
can.
organs, like, the
Hmm.
even binders have detrimental effects if it's not the path you really wanna go down. That's
Right.
the problem is we're not dealing in,
Hmm.
oh, again, like having ice cream for lunch, like,
Right.
yeah, maybe you don't feel that good or maybe you get sleepy, but
Right.
you're gonna be okay the next day. These
Yeah.
things have these consequences
They
and
do.
people don't want to recognize that kids are
Mhm.
making. It's different if you're 18 or you're an adult and
Right.
you say, "Yeah, this is me."
Right.
It's like, "Okay, cool, do you.
Right.
Support that." But kids say the craziest shit.
They do, and that's why I think that having those gender roles explored, and talked about and sat down and discussed, um, is important, right? I think that, okay, hey, you want to explore yourself? You're 8, 9 years old. You want to explore yourself? This is how we do it, right? This is how we start. It's not making medical decisions. It's not making any of those kind of decisions. It's, hey, you want to wear this? Okay, so some of them feel comfortable wearing it around home, right? And exploring that way. Others feel comfortable being able to go to school that way. But at least starting in those areas of, okay, so this is what you're trying to explore. Let's explore it this way without any medical intervention in there. And as that relationship progresses with that parent, you would hope, right, that it would continue down the road of, okay, now if this is the route you want to go, this is the consequences of hormone blockers. This is the consequences of wearing a binder, especially one that doesn't fit properly, right? Um, this is, it's having that relationship with your child. And that is a lot of the problem is that we don't have those relationships with our children because we want to put them in a box that we want to put them in. Right, and so it's getting better. A lot more parents are being more understanding and explorative and being like, "Okay," and they're reaching out to the LGBTQ community and asking q questions, right? Which is important because don't just go on the internet and look up something that's scientific. You ask somebody that's in that community, "Hey, I've got a question. My child is coming up, and this is what they want."
Yeah, but
Do
what
you
if they give you the wrong advice?
well, this is the thing. It's not necessarily giving advice, it's giving resources, right? And the one thing that we don't have here that we're going to be working on is a community center. We don't have an LGBTQ community center here. Um, where we can have live, tangible things, resources for parents to come in and say, "Oh, my child is doing this," or there's queer homeless, queer youth homeless. I mean, we have no place of our own to go to have any kind of like, even if we wanted to have like some sort of production or drag show, we don't have that. We don't have something where we have an office where someone can come in and look for jobs on a computer or have a book that's right in front of them. Like, oh, now I see. Okay, like a book exchange going on, or a small little clothing closet so someone can come in and do their little gender thing or whatever. We don't have any of that. So, right now, the only thing that we have is parents being able to go on the internet or, having to inquire with a group instead of being able to come in and say, yeah, this is something that we have tangible right in front of you. Here you go. Here's some books on this, and I know we'd get the donation of books. I know we'd be able to order them. I know we'd be able to do all of that, but we don't have that here in Humboldt County. And I don't think, and I think, well, personally, I think that if we don't have those things, if we don't have a community center, if we don't have something tangible, if we don't have something where people could come in and ask a person or find the materials or any of that, or just feel welcome in their own damn space, then we're going to continue to have problems with kids just doing what they want to do, right? And going back behind a parent's back because they can. Right? Because I'm sure they would want their parent engaged, but their parent is stomping their foot and not listening, right? Because that's against our beliefs or that's not gonna happen in my home or any of that.
Well, those are the extremes too, but you
Mhm.
also have the parents that do care
Right.
and just wanna watch out for their kid and think
Right.
maybe it's the wrong choice.
Right. Right. And I completely understand that. And there are always going to be consequences to no matter what we do. There's always a pro and a con, right? Like my pro was I'm male. My con is I am no longer considered safe to be around in female company, right? Because I'm male. So a lot of women don't feel comfortable being in the presence of strange men or whatever, and so because now I'm until I open my mouth, of course, but I'm more seen as a predator, right? So I'm more seen as
Well, I
somebody
don't know
who
that all
can.
men are predators. That's
No,
kind
what
of
I
it's
no,
kind of a
no, I'm
crazy
more
jump.
seen as like
You're in the category with us now.
right, I am, and so women be more cautious around me. Will grab their purse more around me more
Was that
than
a culture shock when you did
holy
transition going
hell,
from
right,
I'm a woman in these women's
right.
spaces versus now I'm a guy in these
Right.
spaces?
Right. And so I went for a long time because I'm one of the things I don't have is I don't have a whole lot of cisgendered men that I'm friends with. So not all cisgendered men are going to go, "Oh yeah, I'll answer your questions." No. Um and then, I spent most of the time doing this transition by myself and learning things along the way. So, yes, it was huge for me to realize my mom demonstrated. So, shortly after my transition, and I really started, showing with the facial hair. This is how old I am. In Reading, they had Montgomery wards.
Oh, that is a
Mm,
throwback
So,
reference.
right, monkey wards. So we were going in, and I just went in the door. And I was talking to my mom, and I look back, my mom's not near me. She's back outside the doors. And I was like, "What? All right." And I come out and I go, uh, "Everything all right?" She goes, "Well, you're supposed to legitimately now open doors for your mother." Oh. Oh. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, so that was really it. It was um even though brain up here is male and everything else socialized as female. Right? There were cues I didn't get, and I was like, "Am I missing something?" I didn't understand, right? That it wasn't me that was the problem. I mean, it was, but it wasn't, right? Wasn't me that was like, Am I doing something wrong?" It was literally you've transitioned into a realm that lots of people don't feel safe in.
It's almost like going to a different culture
Mhm.
and trying to learn, okay, what am I supposed to do in this situation?
Mhm.
How do I react?
Right, and so there are still sometimes that pop in my head things that I don't know because I'm not cisgendered. So I don't know how things feel. I don't know what it feels like. I don't know a lot of things. And so they'll pop into my head, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not close enough to any cisgendered man to ever ask those questions. But those are still legitimate questions in my head. And like I said, I did my transition mostly by myself. Like I had to learn by reading and by hanging out with women exactly what not to be, right? And I never would have been an a-hole to begin with, but so that's just not me. But I've had to learn to how to rephrase things, and
Well,
I'm
and even that's a different level of
Mhm.
socialization because how
Right,
women would want men to be and how men are probably two
right,
distinct things.
right. And that's the one thing is that you know for a lot of reasons, some women tend to find trans men very attractive. It's because it's the male presentation. It's the male. It's kind of like a little bit male, a little bit female, right? Because we've been socialized as females, so we tend to have better manners and treat women better because we've been in that position, right? So we tend to be more attractive to some women because they're like, oh, well, you're male, but you have the socialization and you have a better attitude than a cisgendered man would.
I
So.
had not heard that before.
Mhm. Right. So, I've always telling my friends who keep breaking up with cisgendered men, I'm telling you, get a trans man, it'll be just much better.
Which is interesting because trans women have a very hard time in the
Mhm.
cisgender space.
Right.
Cisgender space?
Mhm. Yeah. cisgender space is a little difficult to navigate. Even as even my little world is hard to navigate like that. Um, I don't always feel comfortable in a cisgender space, and the reason is because I mostly with men because I don't know if I'm acting right, and I know that would seem really weird. Like, yeah, you're okay, dude, you're fine, but in my head, Um, I was never socialized that way, so I don't know if I'm, you know, doing the manly thing, right? I don't know if I'm acting right. I don't, and I know, and that shouldn't be a thing. I should just be able to be me, but at the same time, and I am, but at the same time, I don't know that, something that I've done is something that a cisgendered man would do, right?
Well, even just the act of you asking that question is interesting, right? Because,
Mhm.
like, I never think about, "Oh, is this how I'm supposed to do this thing?"
Right. Right. Is this how I'm supposed to do this? Is this how I'm supposed to do that? No, you've been instructed from the time you were born, and then whereas with me, yeah, my dad raised me to be like a boy, but he socialized me a little bit like that, but literally everything in my life was socialized female. Right? Everything that you do, if they see you have long hair and a chest, that's you're being socialized as female. Period. Right? They're not gonna take into the account that you're not. So I had to learn everything, and I'm still learning new things, right? And that's 25 years later. Um, and I'm learning, new terms and everything else that the younger generation's bringing up, and I think that it's great that we have those now. Whereas before, it was not something I could ever define myself with. Um, So I think that having those discussions with your children, having a legitimate place where you could take your child and say, "Listen, we're having an issue. Like, not necessarily a conflict, but we're having an issue. We don't understand what this is or what this means." Right. And having a community resource to be able to go in and do that with um, is very important, right? And then not just for trans people, not just for, but for kids who are exploring how their brain works, teenagers, how their brain works when they come out as LGBTQ, I mean, it goes on forever. So it's not just drag queens and it's not just transitioning. It is literally coming out as how you see yourself and just being accepted that way.
And that's what's up next on the docket for Lost Coast Pride is maybe a community center of sorts?
Yeah, we'd like to work on that. So right now, what's coming up is our April 29th drag show at CR. And then the last weekend in June is our Pride. So was it 24th and 25th? I think. Anyway, that Saturday is a Pride ride, and it'll go from our.
I don't know what a pride ride is.
Okay, so we take all of our vehicles and we meet up at the Arcade Safeway, and we put flags on it. We decorate it with rainbow stuff and everything else, and then we drive down the 101. And last year we did went all the way to Rohnert Park in Fortuna, and then we just hung out at the park and did a picnic and just kind of hung out with everybody. And then it'll probably be the same. And then the 25th is the Pride March and Festival at the Pride March will be in Ferndale, and the Pride Festival will be at Fireman's Park. Um, and so those are our big things coming up. But that's what we're working on as a community center, honestly. And if it stays, Eel River Valley, and then we have something that's legitimate up in Eureka or whatever, I'm very down for that.
Just
I'd
providing more resources for the
Just
community.
providing more resources, yeah, and Eel River Valley is that Fortuna and Rio Dell and everything there, and then Eureka and Arcata and McKinleyville normally have something like I know that they have resources, just not a community center, right? And that needs to happen there as well, so that there's legitimate center there, and then there's something here. and eventually Garberville. I mean, I'd like to have all the entities have something up, right? That's tangible. That would be 3 different centers, and that would be huge, right? And, the one in Eureka could be like a main hub for all the stuff there, but the community members and like in Ferndale, right? We get tourists there all year round from all over the world, right? Nah, there's a few of them that are queer. So having a center where they could go, feel safe, safe space. Hey, look, we've got a place we can go, we can hang out. Would be awesome to have a community center there, or Fortuna for that matter, because that's 5, 7 miles down the road from Ferndale. But yeah, something like that. Those are the things that we're working on now.
Okay, well, Kaelan, this was awesome, man. I really appreciate you coming on. I had a great time talking with you.
Awesome. Same.
Do you wanna plug again where people can find all your stuff, where they can find Lost Coast Pride?
Yeah, Lost Coast Pride is on both Instagram and Facebook as Lost Coast Pride. And the email that we have is Humboldt's, that's with an S at the end of Humboldt, Pride. So Humboldt's Pride at gmail.com. And that's usually how to get a hold of us. Yeah, if we're sticking with just Lost Coast Pride on our social media. Everybody seems to be able to find us. So I'm looking forward to hearing from new people and hopefully perpetuating some more education in the future. So thank you for having me on here.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Lost Coast Pride.
All right, thanks.